I think there's a lack of empathy that goes around in the world in a lot of ways. And I think that's why, the figures were supposed to be up close, almost larger than life, but still kind of life size, and in a way to confront you, to not look away.
The Saginaw Art Museum is currently hosting the exhibition Wonderfully Made, the Anthony and Davida Artist Collection of African American Fine Art. On the podcast here, we are listening to artists and other professionals from the arts community connected to this exhibition. Matthew Owen Wead is an interdisciplinary artist whose practice explores social hierarchy through verbal and written language. He received his BFA from Morehouse College and MFA from University of Maryland with a focus on printmaking, sculpture, and photography. His work often uses multiple mediums and is constructed to be a fully immersive experience. This practice of creating functional objects reinforces that they are not to be seen as fictional objects, but as real-world tools that can be used in society. Listen in and learn more about Wead's work and some of the stories behind the pieces he makes. So I'm here with Matthew Owen Wead, and Matt, I appreciate you coming on the podcast here.
Thanks for having me.
We have two of your pieces at the Saginaw Art Museum right now as part of the Wonderfully Made exhibition. But before we get talking too much about the specific work that you're doing, I'd love to hear some of the story of how you got into printmaking and what got you interested in printmaking and the process of doing art in that way.
Yeah, sure. I started printmaking in college around 2001, maybe 2002. When I was thinking about it, takes me back. And I had a teacher, and he showed us these linoleum blocks. And he said it's fairly easy to do. It's very standard, beginners. But I like the idea of you're able to draw something and then transfer it over to this linoleum block and just make multiple copies. So I thought it was an interesting process, and I enjoy carving. I've done sculptures before, but it was a new way to, image making that you could just make multiple copies, however many you wanted to. And this kind of DIY kind of attitude, like you don't need much, just need a block, a tool, and paper and ink. And then you could just make, 50,000 copies and give it to whoever you wanted without it, costing so much. It's different from painting and drawing, where it's usually one of one. So I thoroughly enjoyed that.
When you sort of first started off with printmaking, did you sort of right away know that was the direction you wanted to go, or were there other things that you tried out before that?
There are other things. Like I said, I'm more of they call it new genre artist, I guess now, where you just or multi-hyphenate artist, where you do multiple things like video work, sculptural work, drawings, and painting. So I've done it all, especially in college. You're introduced to a lot of different practices and mediums. But yeah, I gravitate towards printmaking because of those things and the history behind it too. It's a deep, rich history in Mexico and like this social, political ideals behind it, which, most of my work is dealing with some type of message. So it just fit, perfectly. It's probably my main medium, or, like half and half. With a little bit sculptural work, but I find that it's, I can do a lot of things with printmaking that other mediums you can't really do. Especially I like the idea of the wood too. Like when I found woodcuts, that really piqued my interest as well. Because it's kind of a sculptural element in itself, carving.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the woodcuts that you do. The pieces that I've seen at least, you've come a long way from the small linoleum block. I mean, the larger pieces that you're doing. Tell me a little bit about that process and where you start and how you decided to sort of go big with these pieces.
Yeah, well, I mean, so woodcuts, I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the grain. The look of the grain, it automatically, produces ideas in my head. With white paper or blank canvas, I don't really get those ideas as much. I like the way the grain moves kind of like helps me figure something out. So I gravitate towards that. And also it's a little more forgiving in terms of charcoal because I can like make an image, I can make a stroke. And if I don't like it, I can easily erase it without having to worry about the sensitivity of the paper or damaging anything. So that's why I kind of went towards wood instead of everything else. And just drawing on the actual wood, it kind of gave me this kind of closeness to the image making process. For this particular series, woodcuts, I chose, they're called shooting targets, or they originally were called shooting targets.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea. There was this police brutality video of this kid in a library. He was screaming out in pain, and he was like my first thing. And I just got this image of this back. I was thinking of there's this famous image of this slave who showed his back scars,
right.
And I just had this image. He's not even African American, but I just had this image. I was like, I have to make it. And so I was looking at this wood block that I had, and I could see the grains of the scars. So it's like it kind of like lent itself to it. So I kind of just like took the image in my head, took a photograph, and put it onto the wood, and that kind of gouging kind of just helped itself towards it. So that's when I started like, oh, I have something. So it became this whole series of 15 pieces now, or 16, I think they're 15, of just shooting targets. Because again, it's the size too. I think it's like 24 by 36. So it just fit perfectly for what I was trying to do.
Let's jump in a little bit more on the shooting targets series that you did. Something that I found striking was that sort of size that you're dealing with. I feel like that makes the piece in a way much more lifelike. What kinds of challenges did you run into when you were making this series, either in the development of the pieces or beyond that in showing the pieces?
I think the biggest one for me was trying to figure out who to depict in it, because again, it's finding the specific type of shooting targets, like were they unarmed? Did they seem unarmed? Or things like that. It helped in the beginning because there were things that affected me as a teenager and an adult that I was like, okay, I remember this story. Let me talk about Sean Bell. Let me talk about this story. That was one of the challenging aspects. And then another one was, again, these poses, trying to figure out different poses to reenact it. So it's not necessarily, it's challenging the viewer to see what, the police reports were about. Like, do they seem threatening or things like that, where, it's challenging you to question what's the motives or what they want to do. Physically, I found it, and emotionally, it kind of took a toll on me because I had to reenact the scenes and go over again, like replay the video or replay, the story. Like in the beginning, there weren't many videos out of these stories, so I had to read accounts of it. So it was a little bit easier. But for instance, the one I think that's in your museum, George Floyd, I had to watch that video over, multiple times and then reenact it and, act like I wasn't breathing and things like that. So it just takes an emotional toll in that way. And then the physical toll is just carving out the pieces, like you have to draw the piece, then you have to carve it, and then you have to print it out, these big pieces, 24 by 36, or sometimes it was by myself to print them out. So yeah, I think it was challenging in that way as well.
It's interesting that to sort of hear a little bit more of that story as you were working on these pieces, and you had mentioned that you had some reading material that you used. Are the pieces themselves based off of photographs, or are the poses more constructed from the information that you gathered? Like, is there reference photographs?
Yeah, they were. I'll read the stories and I'll imagine what they look like in the final seconds. That's what I say. It's like the 5 seconds before the shooting occurred or things like that. So I'll read the stories or things like that, and I'll imagine what their face looked like or their position, because again, there wasn't that many videos or photos at the time. And I used myself as a model because I was also accosted by police officers who had the gun pulled on me. So I was, especially at that time, it was around 2005, 2006, where I had the guns pulled on me. So I can remember how I felt in my face, thinking about that. So that kind of lent itself to me trying to imagine what they would look like. So a lot of them have their mouths open or shocked faces because that's what I imagined they would look like in the 5 seconds of being, shot.
In a broad sense, how do you see the role of art and like art specifically communicating about America's relationship with race right now. How do you see the ways that maybe art can communicate with people in a different way than other forms? Can you sort of comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one. An artist friend of mine says that all art is political, like anything you do, so abstract, color field painting is political. And I'm still trying to struggle with that. And I think that every artist has their own, version of talking about things that's going on in their own way. And I can't really tell people what to do because, I grew up as a social political artist, so it's not necessarily a leap for me to talk about these issues. But I do think that art plays a role in just acknowledging it exists and things like that. In any way, even in the institutions that we're, ascribing to and their role and how art is shown and things like that. I think that it's something that needs to be explored and talked about more often instead of just swept under the rug. As both the curator, art historian, artist, I think that we all play a role in, discussing the problems that are within not only, the art community, but, in other areas as well. But yeah, whatever your medium or however you choose to talk about it, I think that's something that needs to be addressed in your own way.
Yeah, I think that, I appreciate that perspective. As a museum community, I know that we're always sort of striving to do better. How do you see art as a means of helping engage people sort of in this moment? Maybe more specifically, how do you want people to engage with the pieces that you are making right now, especially the shooting targets pieces?
I think it's more of like a conversation that needs to be had. I like for these pieces in a way, it's almost an empathy in a way. It's not attack. I like to say that that's not attack. It's like, so, a lot of people may see it as an accusation against the law enforcement, but really it's like, what do you see in those final moments, right? Again, it's hindsight because they're in the moment, but it's this, I think there's a lack of empathy that goes around in the world in a lot of ways. And I think that's why, the figures were supposed to be up close, almost larger than life, but still kind of life size, and in a way to confront you, to not look away, and to engage you, to even just think about it. Even with the George Floyd piece, I like how the wood grains, we were talking about wood grain, how the wood grain looks, but it's also like, look at his face and how it's almost bloated. Like, think about that kind of in the moment kind of thing. So I think art as a museum community or artists is just engage people. I like to say lazy, but just lazy curation or lazy artwork where it's just, you're just making a piece just to make it without thinking about, the viewer or anything like that. There's spaces for it, but right now I don't think it's the time.
Along those lines, in your pieces specifically, you capture a particular moment, much the way that a photograph captures a particular moment. And in our day-to-day lives, we're moving very quickly, and there's this constant motion. And viewing your work, there's a pause in that. And I think that that's really interesting feature when I view those pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the technique that I used for it is kind of like this aggressive mark making, almost like German expressionism, somebody said, Max. So I try to maybe capture the gaze, for a little bit, even if their eyes are closed, again, because they're close up front, but also like they're looking directly at you, for the most part. There's no averted gaze. It's just like looking straight at the viewer, because you are supposed to be the law enforcement or the person who's aiming the gun at the target. So that's interesting you bring that up.
Looking towards the future a little bit, tell me a little bit more about some of the projects maybe you're working now, if you can, or some aspirations looking forward for how you are making art and displaying your art.
Yeah, so I am focusing, as we talked about at the beginning, more on printmaking as my main inspiration medium. So I'm doing some things with mask making and linoleum block cutting in a unique way that I hope to show in the next coming years. I do have a show in Flint, Michigan coming up this fall that deals with the last year pretty much and all the things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Hypertension. So even this last week, what happened, I come up with some images to make. So it should be an exciting thing. I do plan on using some printmaking techniques as well in that, and some figurative works, not necessarily in the vein of the shooting targets, but because those are more contained, I feel like 24 by 36, there's only so many poses you can do. So I plan to expand on the pieces and the room that's necessary, and to just talk about the events that's happened in the past year or so. So I'm kind of excited about getting started on that and showcasing it to everybody.
If there were one thing that you could share with our listeners about making art and the importance of art, can you think of one or maybe I'll let you say one or two things. I know the big question, the big ending question.
Right.
But what would you want people to understand and what would you want to share?
I think that art still is, which is crazy to me, is that art is still looked at as a secondary thing. It's a hobby. It's not something that's important, but it's in everything that we do, we look at, and people don't really acknowledge it. And I do feel like the arts are looked down upon. And I think that people need to support it more than they are in any way they can, especially, because of last year and COVID and, the funds have been depleted. But, I just think that there's an importance of art that needs to be celebrated because I think everybody plays their role. And we definitely have a role in the community, in the world itself. So I hope that kind of answered the question. It's kind of a
sure. No.
And I don't necessarily want it to be like a donate here thing or anything like that, but that was a big thing for me is that, growing up, it was hard for me to get support as an artist, just emotionally or, just, hey, encouragement. So I think that everybody should, try to encourage if they have any artists in the family or thing like that, just keep pushing and keep going.
Well, Matthew, again, I appreciate you being on the podcast here and the incredible perspective that you're providing in your work and your words today. And I look forward to seeing your show down in Flint in the fall.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The Wonderfully Made exhibition is presented by Hemlock Semiconductor with additional support from Morley Companies, Wirt-Rivette Group, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, Michigan Humanities Council, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We look forward to having you see the exhibition for yourself during your next visit. As always, we invite you to subscribe to this podcast and consider making a contribution so that we can carry out our mission of providing art for all.